Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk about this splendid book, Charles Mackerras. Yes, because he needs a book. I don't know if this is the book he needed, but it's one of the books he definitely needed, I have to say. It's not likely to sell a zillion copies because Mackerras, for all of his fame and the fame he achieved later in his life, still doesn't get the recognition he deserves because he was quite possibly the greatest conductor from the second half of the 20th century, along with like Constantine Silvestri. The best musicians don't always get the recognition that should be their due. Why? Because they're musicians. Because they're so involved in music and so completely obsessed with music that people don't understand them. They don't get recognized. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. There are some people who are so completely selfless, and this is the point, selflessly devoted to music, who achieve so much, who are so comprehensive in their curiosity, their enthusiasms, their scholarship, their ability to project all of those things to an audience in performance, that people just sort of scratch their heads and kind of ignore them because they scare us. It's terrifying that anybody can be that good, that frequently, that devoted. I mean, that's who Mackerras was. I mean, he's in my list of, musicians who never made a bad record. It was probably impossible for him to make a bad record because he just had too much ability. And not only does that incite jealousy on the part of colleagues, even though he was the nicest guy in the world, oh my gosh, what a delightful person. But the industry didn't know how to treat him. I mean, think of it this way. Possibly the most valuable thing in here is the complete discography in the back. I mean, that is really helpful because Mackerras never had one single label, ever. I mean, think about his enthusiasms. He was an amazing conductor he invented Janacek for like the rest of the world for the, after his local fame in Czechoslovakia. I mean, he discovered Janacek for all of us, and he was the greatest interpreter of Janacek that we've had yet. I mean, and Janacek is amazing. So there's that. But Janacek was always sort of quirky too, remember? But there was Handel. I mean, there was Mozart. He was a moving force behind the period instrument movement in a good way because he was a tremendous practical musician. He wasn't obsessive about what instruments you used. He was obsessive about the way you played the music. That was what mattered to him, and it really mattered to him. I mean, I spoke to him on several occasions about this. I remember particularly, meeting him. He was doing a run of performances at the Met. He was staying in an apartment in the Juilliard complex at Lincoln Center. And I went to visit him because I wanted to try and talk him into doing a new recording of Dvorak's The Devil and Kate. He'd only done Rusalka, and he didn't really know the other Dvorak operas that well. I mean, the book, of course, says he knew everything, but he didn't. I mean, he knew a lot of things, more than any of us ever will in 20 lifetimes. But he had his preferences and all that, and he wasn't up on the other Dvorak operas, and that was sort of my view of the other big one. And I had 2 copies of the score, so I gave him one, and we were looking at it because it uses a contrabass clarinet and 2 tubas and all these. I figured he'd be interested, and he was interested. And the other thing I wanted to give him was the original correct orchestration of a bit of Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde that hadn't made it into any other published edition, because that's the kind of thing that he loved. He loved doing that scholarly research and looking at the composer's original intentions. So I had, dug this out of the Pierpont Morgan Library, and actually, it's I think they're going to fix it or something. Anyway, I had made copies of all of this material, and I gave it to him, and he promised he was going to play it. And I believe he did. He said he was doing Das Lied von der Erde, I think it was in Edinburgh, or something like that, in the not too distant future, and he was going to, use the original percussion parts. So that was really exciting. So we had a wonderful chat about all that stuff. And then when we got to the period instrument thing, there were 2 things that really struck me. The first was that he was interested just in how different things could sound. His view of, the awful sounds those people were making is that they weren't awful enough. He's like, no, it sounded as different as possible. He just wanted to hear it because his curiosity was insatiable, about the different ways that you could play something and the different sounds that you could get. He knew it wasn't like what it actually sounded like back then. He wanted to know what the possibilities were. And that was a wonderful thing. And I totally sympathize with that too. I mean, talking to him was like speaking to the fount of all music, someone for whom just its existence was such a joy and such a source of perpetual freshness and renewal. And that's the way his performances were. I mean, it was just wonderful talking to the man. But on the other hand, he was a little bit accident prone. I mean, he was so involved in music, he sometimes could seem a little absent-minded. When we had him at the Classical Awards to give him a Lifetime Achievement Award, which was one of like my big pushes, and I was very happy that everyone else agreed to do it. And he came to Cannes, and he was delightful. He was absolutely delightful, and he's such a nice, normal guy. He spent a lot of time on our, the Cannes Classical Awards had a stand at the trade show, so everybody had stands and, things. And he hung out on the stand a lot, and with my parents who were there. And they got to be, they just sat around and chatted and had a wonderful time. And he was sort of toward the end of his life, I guess, or it was in the 2000s. And so, yeah, he passed away a couple of years later, which was very, very sad. But then when he left, he missed his flight somehow, he and his wife, Judy. I don't know how that happened. They just didn't get there. And I got this phone call that they missed their flight. What were they supposed to do? And I was like, I didn't want to take the next one. I mean, what could we do, right? So they somehow managed to get home, but it was just kind of peculiar. It really was, and he could be that way. His life, for somebody who was so joyous and so happy in his love of music, was actually quite tragic. He lost a granddaughter very early to, I think it was childhood leukemia, and his oldest daughter, Fiona, died of cancer a decade later, or thereabouts. I mean, it was marked by real personal tragedy, and it's horrible. His daughter died on the evening he was conducting a major concert, and they didn't tell him about it because they knew that he wouldn't be able to go on, and that he had to do the concert. It was really just horribly heartrending. To see what happened then. But he went on because, of course, he was of his immersion in the music, and afterwards he lost himself in his work. It's really an extraordinary story. His life is an extraordinary story, and this book encapsulates it in a very interesting way. Aside from the discography at the back, and a list of all of his major performances too, which are very helpful. It's not a linear biography. It's the story of his life told by the musicians who worked with him. And they were all asked to contribute articles and write about him, and they did. And it's there are moments toward the end where, your eyes may glaze over because it's just this list of, well, then he went there and played this, and then he went there and played that. And you really want to hear more about him. What made him tick, who he was. I mean, throughout this book, at the end of the day, and it's not a failing of the book because, I don't know what you would do about it. He remains kind of a cipher. I mean, he just this person of omnivorous interests who did everything well, and you can't really get to the bottom of what made him tick as a musician. I mean, he didn't have any major personal quirks. He wasn't like Leonard Bernstein running around, drinking and screwing and being a narcissist. He was kind and generous and giving and sharing, and everything that he did was just this reflection. He was just a medium through which music passed, and it came out clear and purified and enlivening, and that's about it. But there are some wonderful stories. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they do quote him occasionally. There are some amazing stories. One of the most wonderful things about this book is the appendices, of course, which has not only all of the recordings and major performances, but he appeared on the BBC Desert Island Discs show. And each time he had lists of what his desert island discs were. And I'm going to share those with you because I think you'd be fascinated. In 1959, his, let's see, what did he want? His desert island discs in 59 were Mozart's Riconosci in Questemplesso from The Marriage of Figaro with the Glyndebourne Festival Opera under Vittorio Gui. And then Verdi's Va Pensiero from Nabucco with Toscanini, Mozart's Clarinet Concerto with Václav Talich and Vladimir Zhiha. Remember, his wife Judy was a very, very fine clarinetist, by the way. Bellini's Mira o Norma with Maria Callas and Tullio Serafin. Handel's Music for the Royal Fireworks with Mackerras himself doing, conducting the all-wind version that he'd recently done, which is just amazing, of course. Traditional arranged Mackerras vom Himmel hoch with Elizabeth Schwarzkopf and the Philharmonia. Mahler's Der Abschied with Kathleen Ferrier and Bruno Walter. He was always fascinated by Mahler. He always wanted to conduct more Mahler, and he didn't get much of a chance. We only have him doing the first, the fifth, the fourth with the Philharmonic, the London Phil, and or the Philharmonia, I think. Yeah, the Philharmonia, and then there was, or was it the London Phil? I don't know, one of those orchestras. And then, yes, the London Phil. No, it's Philharmonia. Oh, I can't remember. I'll look in the appendix here. And Das Lied von der Erde, which he did several times, and he did a BBC recording of the sixth. That was one of its cover discs or something. It wasn't. Gosh, if only we could have had him do all of it. There are broadcasts and things of him doing tons of music. He recorded everything he did. He asked people to make bootlegs, or if there were broadcasts or official recordings, he got recordings. There's an archive of all of the recordings of his performances, and it would be marvelous if somebody could go through it and cull the best stuff and release some of it, because it all exists, which is wonderful. He loved listening to tapes of performances because that was how he heard mistakes and knew what to improve. I mean, he was totally wonderfully free of snobbery and attitude when it came to that stuff. And then there's Janacek Sinfonietta with the Vienna Phil and Kubelik in 59, one of his desert island discs. So, I mean, the Kubelik Sinfonietta, that was before he sort of took over the piece. Then we've got 1975. This is his desert island classics list. The Mozart Prague Symphony with the London Phil, conducted by himself. The Mozart Clarinet Quintet with Thea King and the Aeolian String Quartet. The Dvorak Cello Concerto with Rostropovich and Talich. Václav Talich was his teacher in Prague in the 1940s, remember. Verdi Otello, the Act II finale with Toscanini. That was the Castaway. That's him, the Castaway's favorite. He was really an opera guy too. We tend to praise his or value his orchestral stuff because he didn't lead a major opera house. He had the Welsh National Opera for a while and Sadler's Wells for a while, but he was always a guest conductor. He was always a guest, always. And he should have gotten Covent Garden, but they passed him over. It's just the same story over and over again. And then we have Janacek, the Macropolis Affair, Act I Prelude with Mackerras. Janacek opera preludes came with the Sinfonietta, that he did that recording at the same time as the Handel water music stuff. Wagner, Magic Fire Music with the Vienna Phil and Fort Wengler. Mahler 7 with Chicago and Schulte. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Handel, Hallelujah Chorus with Mackerras doing it, of course. And then his book, well, you get to pick a book. The book is The Bible in German. The book in 1959 was a foreign translation of a long English novel. Yeah, if you're going to be on a desert island, you might as well learn another language while you read a familiar novel, right? I mean, isn't that cool? And then we have 1999. He was on the show again, and he wanted, Wagner, Selig wie die Sonne from Die Meistersinger, with Barbaroli conducting, of all the Symphony Orchestra. Mackerras, Pineapple Paul with the Philharmonia, with himself conducting. The Act I Prelude to Katya Kabanova with the Czech Philharmonic from his complete, maybe not his with the Czech Philharmonic. That would be his second recording, right? Yeah, that's this one. With Gabriela Benachkova, and I know this recording extremely well because I wrote the notes for it, for Supraphon. I was sort of tangentially involved in some of his projects. That's an absolutely wonderful performance of Katya Kabanova. I don't blame him for wanting that. He doesn't say he wanted it for the amazing liner notes by me. Oh, well. And then we've got, let's see, Mozart, the same aria as before, Riconosci in Quest'amplesso, in this case from The Marriage of Figaro with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, and conducted by Mackerras. Dvorak number 7, the third movement with the Czech fill and talik. Oh, I mean, da-da-da-dum, bum, ba-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, bum, ba-dum-bum-bum. I mean, I don't blame him a minute. It's unbelievable. The Schubert unfinished with the second movement with the Berlin fill and Furtwängler, and Mahler Der Abschied is back, this time with Janet Baker, the Concertgebouw and Haitink, our reference recording, one of the greatest recordings ever, absolutely. And the book, translation of Shakespeare in German, Italian, or Czech, the languages he spoke. And a luxury item, if it's a hot island, a big bottle of suntan lotion. If it's a cold island, a comfortable pillow. There you go. And his favorites among his own recordings. Oh, look at that. Beethoven.
The Ninth.
Yeah, with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic. It's a wonderful, wonderful performance. The Brahms First on Telarc with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. Handel's Julius Caesar with Janet Baker, which is now on Chandos. Janacek's Copacabana with Soderstrom, the first recording he did on Decca. It was the opera that introduced Janacek to the West in the UK when he did it. And then the Mozart Prague Symphony with the Prague Chamber Orchestra on Telarc. Those are his favorite recordings. And he also has a menu for food of love. Yes, a menu. The menu, spaghetti carbonara, veal creole. Oh, my goodness. Veal escallops with Gruyere cheese, pan-fried in seasoned flour with a sauce of onion, garlic, tomatoes, pimento, and marjoram. And framboise des bois. Yeah, raspberries. And I think framboise, yeah, raspberries with fresh cream and kirsch. Oh, my goodness. Wines, appetizer, Vin Santo, and then Verdicchio and Chateau Bataille, whatever, 1961. Music, preferably no music with food. But if necessary, a long serenade or divertimento by Mozart or Haydn played as softly as possible. Okay, you get a sense of the kind of guy he was? I think it's amazing. So the stories here are pretty fascinating for the most part, told by the people who knew him. It's a wonderful collection. It's edited by Nigel, Simeone, and John Tyrrell, who knew him extremely well. And I just think that I'm happy this is here because we need to document this guy as much as we can. We need to keep issuing recordings. The trouble is, who'd buy them? He's just not known as well as he should be. But one can only hope. So keep on listening, friends, and keep on reading. This is essential stuff if you care about classical music and the people who, more than anything else, through their hard work and genius, brought it to all of us. It was a gift. His life was a gift. It really was, and he is sorely missed. Thanks for joining me, and take care.